Hey guys, and welcome back. No, look in the camera. Welcome back, guys, to another YouTube lesson with your history teacher, Mr. Rodriguez. In this video, we're going to look at the MyWorld Interactive textbook, specifically pages C1 to C5. This is the course introduction for the textbook, but it's also going to be an overview of our academic school year. We're going to begin our year looking at the early explorers, people like Christopher Columbus and the Columbian Exchange. We'll look at the early colonies of the New World, places like Roanoke and Jamestown. We'll look at how these colonies eventually developed into 13 colonies along the eastern coast, and how those colonies eventually came to declare independence from England and actually fought a revolutionary war for their independence to become what we would refer to today as the United States. One of the issues we're going to look at this year is how our understanding, our concepts of freedom evolved and changed over time. So in other words, how did freedom evolve from this group of rebels, these people who wanted to be independent from England, to our founding fathers, to the people who wrote the Constitution, and then to the people who were fighting against slavery in the middle of the 1800s, which eventually led to the Civil War. So we'll look at things like the Stamp Act, which was a tax imposed by the British on the American colonists. And they were so upset that they started a revolution and they organized all 13 colonies to fight a war against England. Keep in mind, England was the dominant nation on the planet. It was the largest empire in the world, and they took on that empire because they believed in freedom. And then we'll look at the Constitution and how the people who came together to write the Constitution, men like Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and George Washington, how these guys put together the Bill of Rights, the 10 freedoms specifically mentioned in the Constitution. Everything from freedom of speech to freedom of religion to the right to keep and bear arms to needing a search warrant if they're going to come into your home, and trial by jury, and so on and so forth. And as we move towards the end of the school year, we will look at the people who fought against slavery, the anti-slavery forces, people like John Brown, and eventually how slavery became a divisive issue in the nation between the northern states and the southern states, especially when they were creating new states, and eventually how that division led to the Civil War fought by President Lincoln. We're also going to look at how the United States expanded, because keep in mind that the United States started as 13 colonies on the eastern seaboard, but eventually spread westward all the way to the Pacific Ocean. So we'll look at the way the United States expanded, their motivations, such as the Manifest Destiny, which we'll discuss later, in driving westward expansion, beginning with the Louisiana Purchase by Thomas Jefferson into the Midwest, taking California and much of the Southwest from Mexico in war, basically, and then also the Northwest as well in the Oregon country. And one of the questions we've already touched on, but we're going to look at as the year progresses, is what does it mean to be an American? So obviously there are legal requirements for being an American, right? You need to either be born here or you can become what's called naturalized. That's where immigrants go through the legal process from being a new arrival to someone who has been made an American citizen. There's a legal process for that. But there's also this negative side to that where some people get into this whole game of like, I'm more of an American than you are, right? Or you look different from me, or you believe different from me, so you're not really an American, right? And I think our understanding of what it means to be an American today is much more diverse than what people thought it meant 200 years ago. And we'll look more into that as the year goes on. But looking at our history textbook, you'll see that even in early America, even though men and women were considered Americans, it was only white male property owners who had a full range of rights given to them. Women, for example, could not vote. If you were a minority of any kind, you were disenfranchised, meaning you had no right to vote. You had no say in how governing worked. African Americans, for example, weren't given the right to vote until many years later, until after the Civil War. And then even then, there were a lot of restrictions put in place to prevent African Americans from voting. And women didn't even get the right to vote until 1920. And then blacks weren't really given the right to vote until the Civil Rights and the Voting Rights Acts of the mid-1960s. And one of the enduring mythologies of the American mind is this idea that the people traveling west, these cowboys, these frontiersmen, were so American, so individualistic, so rustic. But at the same time, these people were going west and they were trampling on the human rights of the natives that they encountered and the rights of people who are Mexican citizens living in the West. And so there are many conflicts, many clashes, violent, bloody, where Americans trampled on the rights, the human rights of people they considered to be less than human. That's a tragic part of our history that we really need to grapple with and recognize and acknowledge and not sweep it under the rug like so many Americans tragically do to this day. And of course, we're going to look at immigration, which we've talked a little bit about, but all throughout American history, we see waves of immigrants coming in from different parts of Europe, from Asia, China. And as they come to the United States, they're constantly facing racism and bigotry from Americans who consider themselves to be the real Americans and all these immigrants to be un-American. Even after many of these immigrants went through the naturalization process to become Americans, they were still treated very poorly by Americans. And we see that to this very day. We have people running for president who begin their campaigns by talking about how immigrants from Mexico, for example, are criminals, are rapists, are murderers, are MS-13, or what have you. Negative, awful stereotypes about immigrants coming across the border. So that racism and bigotry that existed back then still exists today, and we hear it from the very mouths of politicians and presidents. So these are just a few of the things we'll touch on as the year goes on. We're going to learn a lot about history. We're also going to learn a lot about the lessons of the past that we can apply to today to solve the problems of today, right? Connecting those dots between the past and the present. There's a saying that history repeats itself. Not sure that history repeats itself, but it sure does rhyme. And the reason why it rhymes is because so many Americans don't know their history, they don't study history, they don't care about history. And so we keep repeating a lot of the same mistakes of the past. So I invite you as we begin this journey, be reading your MyWorld Interactive history textbook, be engaged in our distance learning, and do your best to be a great American, to be an excellent student, and to be someone who understands and appreciates American history. That's going to be our school year. Thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to like and to subscribe. I believe you can push this button right here and it'll have a little subscribe thing here. Yeah, right here. Push that. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. Tighten up. Yes. All right. I don't know. Bye, I guess.